A very good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the 172nd episode of Together for Education webinars brought to you by Notebook. Just over 2 years ago, when the pandemic had just set in and schools had closed down, we at Notebook felt it was our duty to set up a platform for educators to connect meaningfully on discussing problems that they were facing with the rising need of digital education and online learning and arrive at common solutions. Today, 172 episodes later, this platform has grown much bigger than we could have ever anticipated. All thanks to your love and support. We have discussed extremely curricular topics here, like digital learning, NEP, and assessments, extracurricular topics like sports, and theater topics like school finance and management, and even evolved topics like mental health. One of our commonest childhood memories goes back to the classrooms, the place where the young minds start thinking and putting into words the otherwise unarticulated thoughts. Asking questions and answering them is an integral part of the learning mechanism where the students develop the power of why. The power of why is such a magnificent power, ladies and gentlemen, that if mastered properly, anyone can conquer the world. An effective question-answer session breaks the ice at the onset, encourages bonding and team spirit, empowers students to think confidently about their ideas, actively improves speaking and listening skills, builds critical thinking capacity, only to name a very few. These question-answer sessions, if executed intelligently, can be the building blocks of one's entire personality and career as a whole. Questions can be of different types, like closed questions, probing questions, leading questions, loaded questions, rhetorical questions, and such others. With the advent of time and technology, the classroom question and answer sessions have been gradually emerging into a virtual mode. Nevertheless, they will hardly ever lose their charm and effectiveness. Our first speaker on this topic is Mr. Bharat. Mr. Bharat retired as the Deputy Headmaster from the illustrious Doon School in Dehradun after 44 years of serving in education across various institutions. Mr. Bharat served the Doon School as Housemaster, Head of the Department, Dean of Activities, Dean of Student Welfare, Deputy Headmaster, Second Master, and Acting Headmaster. With great distinction, he also carried out a visionary exercise for the Doon School in the year 2011 through an in-depth study of a number of British public schools and various schools in the US. Mr. Burrett qualified as a leadership trainer at Wellington College, UK in the year 2000. He's also an athlete, an adventurer, and a naturalist. And we at Notebook are privileged to have Mr. Bharat as our senior advisor. Sir, thank you so much for being here today. Over to you.
Hello, Sumitra. Thank you so much. I was muted just now. Am I audible, Sumitra? Sumitra?
You are audible.
Yeah, hi. Am I audible, ma'am?
Yes, you are. Loud and clear.
Mr. Bharat, you're perfectly fine. Please go on.
Thank you very much, and a very good evening to you, Achin, our esteemed panelists, Gagori, Meghna, and all our guests tuned in. The topic for the day, I look at children, and when children are around, especially my grandchildren, they are full of questions. Young people learn through asking questions. They ask all sorts of questions, and so much of our early learning is just through questions. The questions is something that leads us to explore our world. And if you look at ancient Greece, the Socratic method is such an important and powerful way of learning. When I was in school, my headmaster always told me, he says, we've got to redevelop this Greek spirit of inquiry. We've stopped asking questions because we think we know the answers. I think questions are a teacher's most powerful tool. as they can help the flow of a lesson. They help a lesson flow. They handle misconceptions. They open up discussions, and they lead to a deeper understanding of the topic. And in fact, entire lessons can be developed through a series of Socratic dialogue, through questions. And I love lessons where a teacher can gradually pull out from being the main questioner and allow the students to ask each other questions and let the lesson flow and let the teacher be pulled away into the circumference. Sometimes, sorry, I have just lost my, excuse me.
Yes, Mr. Barrett, go on.
Excuse me, I just lost my, yeah.
Sorry.
Can you hear me now? Yeah.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Sometimes a good way to start a lesson is through, a formative assessment series of questions. And also you can finish a lesson through a recap through a lot of questions. Teachers ask questions before the lesson just to assess what the students know, what knowledge they bring to the lesson, and a series of questions after it just to reestablish a sort of a recap to the lesson. Now, one very good practice is to make students listen while others answer. It's a very bad habit, I think, for a teacher to repeat the answer a student gives. Because if a teacher answers, then the other students know that the teacher is going to repeat the answer and they stop listening. I think teachers should not repeat an answer a student gives, encouraging, therefore, the classes to pay attention to what their friends say. And of course, so listening becomes an important skill. And sometimes lessons build on the responses of the previous students' answer, and you can build a lesson. Now, an ideal child-centered class is sometimes question and answer based, rather than a teacher-centric class where the teacher sits in the middle and he drones on and on while the class goes to sleep. Questions keep students alive and alert because they never know who's going to be asked. I think in any class, students have already worked out who are the smart students and who are the disinterested ones. And so some of the students who either know the answers who are disinterested will always allow the smart ones to take the answers. And I think best questioning is random. You don't only ask the people who put their hand up. I use a simple rule when I ask questions. I never ask the first person to put his hand up, because if you do that, the others stop thinking, because they believe that the teacher will ask the first person to put his hand up, who is usually the eager beaver or the smart guy. So when you ask a question, I think you should let the question sink for about 30 seconds, let everyone think, and then ask people who don't even have their hand up. Sometimes you may ask a person who has his hand up. And like this, you keep the class on their toes, because nobody knows who the teacher is going to call upon to answer. And that, I think that is a very, very good technique to ask questions. So ask a question, let it sit for about 30 seconds before you pick the person to answer a question. And once they have answered the question, it's not that they've done for the day. They can be asked again. So they have to be on their toes. Now, sometimes a teacher gets a chance to look at his own learning through a lot of questions asked by students. Sometimes students ask tricky questions, which really puts a teacher off guard, which is, in all humility, a teacher has to say, I don't know the answer, and let's go search for it, or I'll find out. And I think through some very, very good questions, a teacher's own knowledge of the subject can grow. So a difficult question is not something that has to be, put down or mocked at. I think it's important that a teacher also learns. I think a teacher should ask good questions and also the higher order questions, because these sort of questions cannot be asked offhand in the class unprepared. I think teachers who prepare what to ask are those people who ask higher order questions. Often a question answer session in class gets even the shy children, the more the more reticent children to open up. There are shy people in class who hate to be asked questions, but it is these people who can be coaxed and urged into asking questions. And it's a very important skill. I think over time, children can also be taught how to ask questions by a teacher. Like, you have to pick the right time to ask a question. Otherwise, it stalls the lesson. You could set in some rules in a lesson when you ask questions, or they can change. The teacher says, in this class, you ask your questions anytime, or you can ask it after the lesson. So I think it's important for children to learn when to ask the questions. Also ask it in a polite, respectful way. They must put their hands up so that they're not 100 questions being thrown at the teacher at the same time. They have to learn how to breathe, throw their voice and be audible so that everyone hears the question. Also, the students must learn to come up with the answers themselves. They must, as I said earlier, listen to the responses of other students because that's important. And also, sometimes a teacher might ask a student to meet him after class. And sometimes the student may even email a question that was a little too long. And so teachers should be open to being asked questions even after the lesson. I think the goal as teachers, we must understand that we don't know everything and that there are children in the class who might know more than us on this topic. And by asking questions, you make the children believe that they're not empty slates, that they have so much to offer. And you can develop a lesson from what the students tell you, and they become co-holders or co-shareholders of that lesson. Because the word edusere really means the bringing out from students and not putting in to students. And what does a teacher expect the class to learn from the questioning process? That is what a teacher has to understand. What is there to learn? Now, some teachers ask questions to check for understanding, which benefits the teacher more than the student. After you've taught a principle or a concept, most teachers say, have you understood? It's a very rhetorical question. Most students will say yes, even if the answer is no. And so the most common question a teacher asks is, have you followed? Have you understood? And you get an answer mostly yes. I think it's more important to phrase that question differently. Have you answered? Puts the onus on the student. Because if the student says no, it means the student hasn't understood and he may be considered dumb or whatever. But if a teacher asks the same questions in another way, let's say he asks, have I taught you this lesson so that you understood? Have I made it clear? Have I made the concept clear? Have I been clear in my teaching? The moment he uses the word I, the onus is on the teacher. And then the student doesn't feel bad to say, no, sir, I haven't really followed that. So rather than say, have you understood? You can say, have I made this lesson interesting enough? Have you followed it? I think sometimes it's very good practice for a teacher to call in a colleague, another teacher, to be sitting at the back of the class and to observe how he asks questions. Are you asking only one half of the class? Are you asking the front benchers? Are you avoiding the rear benchers? So sometimes teachers aren't aware of this. And a colleague can be a very, very good critic and offer good feedback to a teacher who wishes to be an expert at asking questions. I think the questions are the soul of a class instruction. And I believe teachers should get it right and not leave a stone unturned to become a good questioner. And as mentioned earlier, there are different types of questions. You have managerial questions where the teacher says, have you all got your books ready? Have you all got a pen in your hand? These are managerial questions. Then there are rhetorical questions that don't need an answer. For example, a teacher might say, at the beginning of the lesson, we learned that air needs to be cooled for it to condense. Yes? Now, he's just checking on learning. Or to emphasize an important point, teacher might say, okay, so vitamin D is produced by exposing your skin to sunlight. Isn't that right? And students say yes. So used regularly, students get used to the underlying message of rhetorical questions. That the teacher is repeating something because it is important and therefore I need to remember this. Then you have closed questions, which is, a yes or no, a question that requires a yes or no answer. These may be simple, but they're also important. They check for knowledge. These questions should be used where there's a specific answer or a range of answers. For example, what is the change of state called that occurs when water changes from solid to liquid? There is only one answer, and the students should know that. Then there are certain hinge questions, which are essential. This gives the teacher, they give the teacher the ability to investigate whether the students understand so that they can move on to the next topic. And of course, the most important questions to my mind are the higher order questions that students need to clarify certain issues. Could you give me an example? Sometimes questions that probe a student's assumption. What are you assuming here? What could we assume instead? There are questions that probe reasons, evidence, you cause and effect. These questions lead students to support their arguments. What are the reasons for saying that? What other information do we know about this topic? Then there are questions that probe implications and consequences. For example, you might say, when you say this, you are implying this. If I do this, what will happen? Then there are questions where students need to recognize and clarify their own thought process by the teacher asking, could you explain further? Are you having difficulties? Now, these we should ask questions that require students to define their positions, sometimes play the devil's advocate. Even with students you agree with or who articulate their points more cogently, all students can benefit from this intellectual exercise. It is always a good practice to review all our interactions, our interaction with students, and to find out whether they're really gelling with us. I think the best way a teacher and a student can connect is through a lot of questions. That's a connecting issue. I think, from the assessment point of view, it may also allow misconceptions that, to be tackled. And sometimes teachers ask, have you understood? Now, some of the questions that we need to ask is, what do you think? Very important for a teacher to ask, what do you think? Teachers, children ask sometimes a lot of questions because they are used to getting their answers. By asking the student what he thinks, you open the question to the student to see if he can struggle with the answer. It is time to change the mindset that teacher has all the answers. So we ask students, what do you think? Very important. And the other thing that I would like to say is that sometimes teachers should ask a student what might be the answer rather than what is the answer. Because when what is the answer is asked, it assumes there's only one answer. But when you ask a student what might be the answer, it tells the student that there are many answers and all may be correct to some degree. So what might be the answer is a good question, a good way to question. I think today, we can get answers to most of our questions by the click of a mouse on the World Wide Web. But it's important for students to ask teachers questions because it is not only the answer. There are certain nuances that a teacher can give and a computer cannot or may not. So a question is to the question, how was I born? And, a teacher or a parent has different answers to that, depending on the age and the mental capacity of a student. How was I born? Why was I born? Now, nobody can answer that question except a human being. I think that on the online classes that we've gone through in the last 2 years, teachers were so hell-bent on finishing syllabus, going through the courses, that I think the art of question and answers suffered a lot. And now that schools have reopened and we are back to class, I hope teachers are going to be back to that, the nitty-gritty of question answers. And with that, I'm going to stop here and say that thank you so much for listening to me. Sumitra, over to you. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, sir. Thank you for that wonderful introduction to this topic. We could not have asked for anything better from your experience. Also, sir, I would like to say that the inputs that you shared, especially for the students, would be very, very helpful for them, all those who are listening to us. Well, let's carry on then. Ladies and gentlemen, our next speaker on this topic is Achin Bhattacharyya. Achin is the founder and CEO at Notebook, a chartered accountant by training. Achin was a director at Deloitte prior to starting Notebook. He has worked in India and abroad in various senior capacities in GE, PwC, KPMG, and Deloitte. Achin is a member of the Institute of Chartered Accountants of England and Wales, a fellow of the ICAI, a member of CPA Australia and CPA Ireland, and a member of CIMA UK. He is also the recipient of the prestigious Indian Achievers Award. An avid reader and a passionate traveler, Achin has keen interests in economics, history, literature, and philosophy. He is a regular speaker at various forums and chambers of commerce and also contributes articles to numerous publications regularly. He is also on the board of some of the most renowned corporates and contributes significantly to their brand strategies. Achin, over to you.
Good evening, everyone. Sumitra, am I audible?
Yes, Achin, you are perfectly audible. Please continue.
I once again welcome all of you to today's session. Now, before coming to the nuances and nitty-gritties of this topic, if we take a step back and ask a very simple question, how do we talk about the value of school? How do we define the meaning of a quality education? The value of school has traditionally been measured in terms of results, grades and exams, projects, and essays designed by teachers to match the taught curriculum and dutifully recorded in report cards and sent out to parents each term. However, over the past few decades, if you see, there's been a sea change. And this kind of results have lost ground to external measures, be it standardized tests that allow for easy ranking and comparison of students across disparate settings. Now, increasingly, these have become the markers of quality. Today, more and more, we can see that in every sphere. The measures by which we assess progress and the outcome that teachers are teaching for, that students are working towards, and that parents expect. Now, but the question is that, is this really why we send our children to school? Is this truly the goal of education to which we collectively aspire as a community? Now, commenting on education reforms in a back to school issue of the New York Times Magazine, I was reading about a very nice quote. I found it very appropriate by historian Dan Ravitch, who stated that the single biggest problem, and I repeat, the single biggest problem in education is that no one agrees on why we educate. Faced with this lack of consensus, policymakers define good education as higher test scores. And I'm not discussing about K-12. I'm not confining my discussion to our country. I'm discussing about a global phenomenon. I'm discussing about what policymakers around the world are thinking. I'm discussing about what academicians, educationists, reformists are discussing across academic corridors throughout the world. Now, although the definitions of policymakers surely matter, they are not the final arbitrators in this debate. And why so? Because we would all agree that policy is ultimately shaped by societal, organizational, parental, and student-held definition of good or great, or any adjective we use to define exceptional quality. Now, these definitions establish the broader context in which academic institutions operate. It is these conventions about quality that give rise to standards that shape the lives of all stakeholders, be it esteemed educators, students, and that define the outcome of which all efforts must be aligned towards. Now, we must change the way we talk about education. Why this is relevant for this topic, I'll just come to it in a while. I believe indeed it is very, very relevant. But we must change the way we talk about education, as Elliot Eisner, a former professor of art and education at Stanford, and one of the leading academic minds across the world. A lot of research papers have been published by him in academic journals. And he said that as long as academic institutions, schools treat test scores as the major proxies for students' achievement and education quality, we will have a hard time refocusing our attention on what really matters in education. Now, ultimately, our definition of a great school or quality education matters because it will define what we give time to and what becomes a priority in the day-to-day life of the classroom. It will shape our expectation. When I say our, I mean all members of the academic community, all members of this entire schooling ecosystem, including parents. Of course, their expectations do matter in terms of shaping policies. It will shape our expectations of what schools can contribute to our lives and to our society. In short, our definition of what makes a quality education shapes our aspirations. Now, what else should we step into, be it as parents, as educators, and as society at large? So yes, it matters how we talk about schooling and its purpose. It matters how the society talks to its politicians, how policymakers talk to the media, how principals talk to teachers, how teachers talk to students, and how parents talk to their children. It matters because our talks shape our focus, and our focus direct our energies, which will shape our actions. Now, with this background, today, if we look at the seismic change that is happening around us, today, if we look at the fact that the entire civil society is waking up to this, that okay, grades are one aspect, but of course, education has a far larger meaning, as also evidenced by the new education policy and its dynamic path-breaking reforms that have been proposed. Now, one thing is very clear, that the art of asking questions is so important. Giving students the confidence to not only memorize, but also apply their knowledge, because that is what the newest skill will look for. But it's very appropriately said that any information, any questions that students have today can be answered with the click of a mouse. So that very seriously undermines the importance of memorizing, the importance of being able to retain information. That's only one part of it. I think jobs of the future will demand much more application of knowledge. And that is where it's so important to be able to critically analyze any given information. It is so important to be able to challenge the status quo without any inhibitions, asking questions, irrespective of however simple it seems to the rest of the world. Now, all stakeholders in the education system around the world are aware about this, because it seems so obvious that when students know how to ask their own questions, they take greater ownership of their learning, deepen comprehension, and make new connections and discoveries on their own. Now, however, this skill, although it looks so simple at the surface, is rarely, if ever, deliberately taught to students from kindergarten to high school, the art of asking questions. Typically, questions are seen as the province of teachers, of esteemed educators who are masters at their craft, who spend years figuring out how to craft questions and fine-tune them to stimulate students' curiosity or engage them more effectively. And yes, it has worked. It has worked for generations, no doubt about it. It has served its purpose. However, new age research has found that teaching students to ask their own questions can accomplish the same goals while teaching a critical lifelong skill. Now, I'll discuss about the question formulation technique, QFT. Right Question Institute have developed this particular technique, and I was going through some papers and some articles, and I found this very interesting. This technique helps students learn how to produce their own questions, improve them, and strategize on how to use them. I think the best part of it. The origin of this particular technique can be traced back to 2 decades earlier. There are a lot of dropouts that were happening in the city of Lawrence in Massachusetts. The city of a very small city, roughly around, one second. Roughly around only 89,000 residents. And also the residents of esteemed poet Robert Frost for his early school years. His essays and poems were first published in Lawrence High School newspaper. Now, as researchers, we're looking at this phenomena that why is this high dropout rate happening? Why are so many students dropping off? And they worked together to increase parent involvement in education. They went across door to door, interviewing parents, talking to students. And one problem that they zeroed in was, and which a lot of students gave this feedback to their parents, that we are not going to school because we don't know. We really don't know what to ask. Eventually, this problem led them to create a simple but powerful process that has been used effectively in a wide range of fields. And it has even been mentioned in a lot of publications of Harvard, and it's being used globally. In healthcare, for example, research has shown that question formulation technique produces dramatic increase in levels of patient activation and improve patient-provider communications. If a patient is actually encouraged and taught how to ask questions to the healthcare provider, to be an active participant in the entire process and not a passive recipient, it dramatically improves his or her response to the treatment. And it has been proved through research. In the classroom, teachers have seen how the same process manages to develop students' divergent, convergent, and metacognitive thinking abilities. So when I say divergent, of course, brainstorming, convergent, categorizing and prioritizing, and metacognitive in the sense reflective thinking abilities in a very short period of time. So teachers can use this technique at different points. On one hand, to introduce students to a new unit, also to assess students' knowledge to see what they need to understand better, and even to conclude a unit to see how students can, with the new knowledge, set a fresh learning agenda for themselves. And it can be used for all ages. That's the most beautiful part of it. Across grades, across classes, students have used this technique to develop a lot of things. So I was reading about this, that be it science experiment, creating their own research projects, begin research on teacher assigned topics, prepare to write an essay, analyze a word problem, think more deeply about a challenging reading assignment, preparing for an interview, or simply to get themselves unstuck at times while going through a particular topic. A student may not know how to move forward with it, and it helps. And there are 6 key steps that this technique discusses about. First and foremost, of course, it always starts with the esteemed educators. Teachers design a question focus, which is so important because teachers actually can guide students in terms of, they can give strategic direction in terms of their thinking process. They can actually prompt a particular sentence, a particular topic that can be presented in the form of either maybe a statement or a visual or audio aid, maybe a simple picture that can trigger a host of questions, a simple audio clip that can trigger a huge list of questions. And it helps in attracting student attention and also quickly stimulate the formation of questions. So of course, we start with this teacher-led process, educator-led process. Second, of course, is student-produced question. Students use a set of rules, which are of course given by educators, which are like clear protocols for producing questions without assistance from teachers. And very simple rules have been defined here. First and foremost, ask as many questions as you can. Second, do not stop to either discuss, judge, or answer any of the questions. First, ask the questions. Third, write down every question exactly as it was stated. And fourth, change any statement into question. Now, before student starts generating their questions, teacher introduces the rules and asks students to think about them and discuss possible challenges in following them. Now, once the students get to work, the rules provide a firm structure for an open-ended thinking process. Students are able to generate questions and think more broadly than they would have if they have not been guided by these rules. So rules like they act as a stand as a guide, as a framework within which students can freely express themselves and not be worried about how many questions they're asking. As many questions as they can, just write them down. And of course, post this, students improve their questions by analyzing the difference between open-ended and closed-ended questions. Bharat also referred to this. And by practicing changing one type to the other. Teacher begins this step by introducing definition, like so, little more clarity on what actually is open-ended and what closed-ended questions constitute about, few examples. And then students use this definition to categorize the list of questions. Now, teacher at all stage acts as a moderator, as a mentor, as a go-to person, and leads them, handholds them through the process. But by doing this, it also helps tremendously in developing confidence of the students. Now, like for example, to conclude, teacher asks students to change at least one open-ended question into a closed-ended one, and vice versa. Now, it actually helps the students to think about how the phrasing of a question can actually affect, because it all depends on the way you ask. And the way you put your point across is important not only during your schooling years, but throughout your life. Even while you're working in your professional life. And how the way you put across your point actually affect the depth, the quality, the value of the information that they will obtain. Because same question, if put differently, and I think Bharat gave a wonderful example of this. The teacher taking the onus on themselves while asking a question, so that students are inhibition free. They can come up with their doubts. Of course, next is students prioritize their questions. Step 4. The teacher has, like with the lesson plan in mind, offers criteria or guidelines for the selection of priority questions. In an introduction to the unit, the instruction may be, like say, for example, choose 3 questions, choose 4 questions you most want to explore further. Now, while a teacher does this, the rest is on students. Students move from thinking divergently to thinking convergently, zero in on their focus on their inquiry, and plan concrete action steps for getting information they need to. The information that they need to complete the lesson or the task at hand. Next step, of course, will be two teachers and students working together to decide on next steps. Now, how to use these questions? For example, one teacher presented all groups' priority questions to the entire class. The next day, during a do now exercise, asked them to rank their top 3 questions. Eventually, the class and the teacher agreed on this question for their seminar discussion, maybe one particular question. And that helps because while working collaboratively, while working in a group, students also develop the idea of being more receptive or being more open to the other person's views, which will help them throughout their life. And of course, last point, step 6 is students reflect on what they have learned. I think the most important point, reflection, which will increase the takeaway. The teacher reviews the steps and provides students with an opportunity to review what they've learned by producing, improving, and prioritizing their questions. Making this completely transparent. This exercise should be completely transparent so that it helps students to see what they have done and how it has contributed to their thinking and learning. They can internalize the process and then apply it in many other settings. Now, when teachers deploy this in their class, they notice 3 important changes in classroom culture and practices. First, it consistently increases participation in group and peer learning process because students feel much more free. They are inhibition free. They can come up with as many questions as they want. Second, improve classroom management. And third, enhances their efforts to address inequalities in education. Now, At the end of the outcome is that to ensure that students go further, deeper, and ask questions more quickly than ever before. Of course, I'm sure there are practical challenges with regard to the syllabus, practical challenges with number of classes that are assigned to a particular topic. But having said that, I think as far as the intent is concerned, the intent is very clear: to equip students with new skill and confidence, which will help them in order to ensure that they're ready for jobs in the future, which we haven't even heard about, which do not even exist today. So give them that confidence to be able to apply their knowledge, to be able to freely, express themselves, and not to simply nod their head, even when they do not understand. We really want more confident children who can come up with their doubts, who can actually ask and feel free to express themselves. So I think it's a wonderful topic, and we have a very good experienced panel here today, very senior panel of educators, and I'm sure that all of us are eagerly waiting to hear from them with regard to their perspective on this topic, their real life experience, their case studies, etc. I thank all of you for giving me a very patient hearing. Over to you, Sumitra.
Thank you, Achin. Thank you for your inputs. They were highly informative. I'm sure the teachers will inspire and stimulate students to ask questions and thereby reach the objective of getting better students. Well, to carry on with our session, ladies and gentlemen, as Achin has also mentioned, we have a wonderful panel here today. And a little bit, I would like to just deviate from the topic a little bit and talk about us here at Notebook. We at Notebook are an EdTech platform that creates short videos pertaining to the school curriculum. This means that every topic from every subject of the school's syllabus has been converted into a series of short videos that can be used in two different cases. One is when you, as a teacher, are starting out a topic in your classroom, you can play one of these videos as a method of visually introducing the topic to your students. These videos are just 6 to 10 minutes in duration and take up very little of your class time while offering the right kind of material to students to generate curiosity and excitement. The second is when the student is studying at home months later, they have access to the same videos on their personal devices, be it a laptop or a smartphone. They can watch the videos over and over again until they get a very clear understanding of the topic that you had taught. What I'm going to do now is play you some short snippets of Notebook videos so that you know what they exactly look like.
I hate to interrupt in the middle, but there's no audio.
Ma'am, we are trying from our end. I'm sure we'll be able to think, but otherwise, just the video would perhaps give an idea to the students of what it is all about. Well, the audio is just missing, unfortunately.
The hermit was tired, and hence the Tsar offered to dig the earth on his behalf. But the hermit continued to dig on his own. The Tsar once again requested the hermit to allow him to dig. Finally, the hermit agreed. The sun was about to set, but the Tsar went on digging. He still had not received the answers to his 3 questions. Then a bearded man came running and sank to the ground. The man was badly wounded in his stomach. The Tsar attended to the man and managed to revive him after long hours of care and attention. The Tsar was very tired, and he fell asleep on the threshold of the hermit's hut. The wounded man woke up in the morning and told the Tsar that he had wanted to kill him. The Tsar had killed his brother and had taken away his property. However, the Tsar's bodyguard had seen him and injured him. The wounded man was very grateful for the Tsar's care and service and promised to be faithful to him forever.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, there are some short snippets from the notebook videos as you just saw now. So we have today connected with over 2,000 schools and have more than 26 lakh students benefit from our videos. If you head over to our website, www.notebook.school, or use our mobile apps for Android and iOS, you would find more than 10,000 such videos at your disposal. With that, it is now time to introduce the wonderful panelists that we have with us today. We have with us today Mrs. Yashika Bhardwaj. Having completed her schooling from England, she completed her honors and masters in English from the Punjab University, Chandigarh. She secured the gold medal in her bachelor's as well as her master's degrees in education. She has been in the field of education since 1985. A keen writer, she has authored several books in the educational field and has written several articles for journals such as Swagat and The Cavalier. An excellent orator, she has been an active member of the debating societies in India and England and has compared events at the national level, such as the Army Day Parade held in New Delhi. She has held the esteemed position President of the Government College for Girls, Chandigarh, sports in charge of the hostel of GCG, and the President of the Youth of Raksha Bhavan, New Delhi. She has been a keen sportsperson, having represented her school in athletics and basketball, and her college in lawn tennis and swimming. She has also been the winner of the Noida Squash Open for women. She has been actively involved in community service, having conducted adult literacy drives for women, computer literacy campaigns, and financial empowerment for women. She has been appreciated by the South Asian Association for Regional Cooperation for her efforts in environment education. An avid traveler, she has traveled vastly not only in India, but across the world. She has been a passionate and dynamic teacher, committed to the student's success, targeting that each student maximize her or his potential. Her teaching learning methodology has enabled her students to attain a high level of achievement in her subject. She has been appointed by the CBSE as an observer for inspections and examinations, as a mentor for implementation of academic strategies, and has been a CBSE counselor for over 10 years. An essential team player and innovative thinker with a high level of self-motivation. She has been the principal of CBSE schools for the past 19 years. She is currently the director of Bharat Global School in Greater Noida. She has been at the forefront of conducting training programs for teachers across the nation. Ma'am, thank you so much for being on the panel today. We look forward to hearing your views on this topic.
Thank you for having me.
Yes, ma'am. We also have with us who is a senior management professional with impeccable qualifications and impressive all-round experience across various industries, especially the public sector and education, offering a unique blend of CFO expertise and end-to-end management consulting with customer-oriented cost-effectiveness focused expertise. He holds a BSc, MBA, IIMA, ACA from India, FCCA from the UK, CPA from Singapore, and CPA from the USA. Group CFO experience spanning Middle East, 5 years, South Asia, 12 years, and Asia Pacific, 15 years, in finance and accounting domain, offering a unique complementary blend of 15 plus years, CEO and CFO expertise across various industries, including public sector and private sector, and 15 plus years end-to-end consulting, ITES, shared services, BPO expertise across government, education, pharma, and healthcare, and private sectors in P2P, O2C, R2R, and MIS, analytics, KM, gained from Big Four, Ernst & Young, and ITES giants, Wipro and HCL. He is currently the CEO of Skylark World School in Lucknow. Sir, thank you so much for sparing your time to be here with us today. We also have with us Mrs. Upma Mahajan, who is the principal of Sumitra Devi Arya Senior Secondary School, Dinanagar. She herself is a BCom from Hindu Kanya College, Kapurthala, and went on to do postgraduate in English, a Bachelor of Education, Master in Education, and Master in Philosophy, which is a MPhil. She is currently pursuing her doctorate in Educational Psychology. She cleared CTET in 2013 and also holds a diploma in software technology. She has 7 years of teaching experience and 8 years of administrative experience across various schools. She is currently working as principal at Sumitra Devi Arya Secondary School, Dinanagar, since September 2012. She has been working as resource person with CBSE and freelancer in CCE, life skills, behavior management, lesson planning, time management, stress management, and classroom management. She has also worked on gender sensitivity, value education, remodeled assessment, English core, inclusive schools, career guidance, handwriting improvement. She has conducted more than 80 workshops at various schools in Northern India. She has also been felicitated by numerous awards. She is the proud possessor of the Prime Minister's Award for India's Best Orator at Prime Minister's Rally, year 2000. She participated in Republic Day Parade as an NCC cadet in the year 2000. She is honored by the Governor of Punjab and Education Minister in the year 2000. She has to her credit 11 certificates of zonal and final youth festival conducted during various sessions by GNDU Amritsar. The Best Principal Award by Bharat Vikas Parishad in 2014 and 2017. Dr. APJ Abdul Kalam Award for Enrichment in Education by IITA in 2018. Shiksha Alankar Award by Khabre Abhi Tak in September 2018. Honored by Cabinet Minister Navjot Sidhu on 15th of August 2019. She also received the Bhishma, the Determination Award for Innovative Teaching Practices by All India Principals Association in January 2021. Honored by Cabinet Minister Tript Rajinder Singh Bajwa, February 2021. Honored FAP State Award for Dynamic Principal September 2021. Ma'am, thank you so much for sparing your time for the panel today. We look forward to hearing your views. I shall switch on my camera. Once again, a very good evening. And thank you so much for being here. I would request the panelists to kindly unmute themselves and switch on their cameras, please. Once again, a very good evening, and thank you so much for being here today. We proceed now with the panel's discussion. We have a few topics lined up. We have a few questions to boot. So here goes. I would request Mrs. Yashika Bhardwaj to first give her point of view. The question is, ma'am, for you, what are some of the ways to moderate a question and answer session in a classroom. Over to you, ma'am.
Thank you, Shobhitra. Firstly, thank you to Notebook for having me over as a speaker on your panel, and a big hello to everyone over here. It's a very interesting topic that we are discussing today. It's the art of questioning. And the question you asked me is how a teacher can actually moderate a question answer session. I think what we must lay down, as they say in Hindi, patthar pe lakeer hai, that teaching and questioning are actually two sides of the same coin. And if you think back in the past, and if you think of evolution itself, if we didn't question, we wouldn't progress. The very existence of our being, everything that we do, even if you think of technology, technology came and has advanced only because somebody questioned the existing system. An existing system, whether it be as mundane as work being done in a kitchen, and how we can make work easier in a kitchen for mom. Maybe that was a question that led to a large number of gadgets being invented. So questioning, according to me, is very, very integral to the process of the pedagogical delivery that is there. I would also like to have a slight change of mindset here, that when we think of questioning, the very first thing that comes to our mind is that a teacher is asking questions from the students, but the teacher must learn to be not just the questioner, but also the questionee. And rather than being the sage on the stage, she can be a guide on the side and encourage learning by or through the art of questioning and answering questions. I share with you a recent experience. I was in a class of grade 9, and there's this wonderful poem by James Kirkup that they do, saying that the title of which is No Men Are Foreign. And the entire poem we discussed in the class, not as referencing to the poem, but through a question answer method and a discussion method about what's going on in the world today, which is with reference to the situation in Russia. And the entire, out of 40 minutes, almost 30 minutes of the period was spent in just repartee, where the students were asking questions related to this political situation, and I was asking questions to them, and we were just discussing the matter. In the last 10 minutes is when the poem was read, and the student said, ma'am, this applies to what's going on right now in the world. So questioning is a part of conversing. It's not just an evaluation tool. And I would encourage teachers everywhere all over the world to understand this concept of a pre-conference and a post-conference. In a pre-conference is what you know you're going to be teaching in a class and what your students have expectations of you. And your post-conferencing can have a variety of techniques that can be used, one of which is just putting on a board and giving them those sticky notes and asking the students that what are the 3 things that you learned and what are the 2 things that you didn't know that you got to know about, and the 1 thing that still stays unquestioned. So it gives the teacher a focus as well. It gives the class a focus as well. To encourage the art of answering in a class, there's a plethora of games, tools, apps available, whether you're online or offline or in a hybrid mode. So use those techniques in games. Use your students having peer questions. Put a little softball in the class and ask a student a question and ask the students to throw the ball to somebody, whoever he or she wants, and the next question goes over there. Have the students create a database of questions, and that database of questions can be used. There are millions of tools and techniques that you can use, but we must understand that we need not simply stick to what, where, and when as far as questions are concerned. Those are closed questions. If we can ask the students the how and the why of it, regardless of the subject that you are teaching, I think you'll find that the teaching learning process in the class is an exciting one, and exciting all through the art of questioning. I think with that, I should have been able to answer the query that you've put to me.
I think you have, ma'am, answered more or less on the lines that we were expecting, but I would also like to put forward this question to the other panelists, if they would like to share their views on this. Maybe Mr. Hariharan or Mrs. Upma Mahajan, if she would. Sir, would you like to say something about this particular topic on the ways to moderate a question and answer session in a classroom? Well, I think I'll get on to the next question then.
I would like to put it up.
Sure, sure. Please come first. Yeah.
As it has been beautifully introduced by Bhardwaj. Truly, I too believe that the questioning and the art of moderating doesn't simply lies with the teacher only. It is actually the environment of the classroom uh, which inculcates this habit in the students to question the teacher. And as we find, when the child enters the school, he is so curious, he is so inquisitive to know about various concepts, why the stars are there, why the water is so clear, why the sky looks so blue. But as the classes enhances, the we all have seen it that the questioning decreases. Now, this is a big dilemma, a big question mark. Why is our teaching not appropriate for making our children love to question? Or are they being afraid of being asked the questions by the teacher? Or are there there are many a times there are students in the class who are going to deviate what the teacher is teaching, and it takes a turn to some other direction what the teacher is talking about. So this art of questioning cannot come over the night that a child wakes up and says that I'm ready for the marathon. It is actually a thing which needs practice, training, and of course mentoring. It isn't a new thing to our culture or to the world's culture. We can often talk about Sophocles. We can often uh, get back to our Upanishads, the times when Buddha told his disciples to question him about the teachings of the world, the teachings of what life has in depth for us. And even today, if you visit their monasteries, you will find the monks having lots of question rounds taking place. There are many study cycles taking place in our country today, which are discussing about various books, or say about the historical or the religious books. And those circles are formed only and only because people have many questions which are still unanswered. So, our classrooms are the places where this art of questioning may be taught and practiced to our students, and of course, teachers are the one who are going to be the catalysts for that. That's all from my side.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you. Input would be, I'm sure, listened to by all who are there today in the panel, as well as the people who are streaming live right now. My second question, sir, is to you, Mr. Hariharan.
Yeah.
What other challenges do you think is associated with these mental setup of questioning and answers, etc.?
Yeah. Thank you, sir. Good evening to everybody. There was a bit of a video hitch, and so I think I was visible only for the last half an hour, I guess.
Yes,
But
sir.
I'm fine now. Thanks. I think one of the main challenges which come in with respect to the Q&A moderation and so on is the inadequate understanding of what is the objective of the session itself. There is a Q&A session. what the objective itself is. For example, the main objective of a Q&A session, whether it's in a classroom environment or whether it's going to be in a seminar or in a higher classes environment, is that the objective is to bridge the knowledge or the learning gap. That is a fundamental objective of that. And in this, what is the guiding principle which is being used to bring in such a concept of question and answer? Ideal is to go back to the Gurukul method of teaching in the olden days, but nobody has got the time or the energy for that today. But the guiding principle is that one can learn from others' experiences. There is a fundamental one, which means if a child is asking a question and it is being answered, everybody else can understand. They don't have to ask the question again. That's one. And second is the basic idea of education itself is to avoid reinventing the wheel. So these are the two main guiding principles, I will say, for the Q&A session itself. Now, the next is the process of the Q&A. It consists of three, basically. One is the identifying the gap. And second is clarifying and addressing the gap. And the third, finally, is the moderation when it comes in. Now, one way to identify the gaps basically is to encourage questions. I think I have seen from my experience that most of the time, the problem is that children are averse to asking questions because sometimes they think it is a very silly question. And, people will think that I'm a fool. I'm not able to understand the simple concept. But I have learned from experience, and I should be very thankful to my colleagues also, and actually my fellow students. I have experienced that the children who do very well are the ones who are not afraid of asking questions. However stupid it may sound, it doesn't matter. The point of getting an answer to that and clarifying the doubt and bridging the knowledge gap is much, much more important than the sort of ego or what others are going to say. I think that is a fundamental thing I've seen. Second is to encourage doubts and participation from all, not just the bright few, as it was already pointed out by Mr. Philip, including the backbenchers or the last benchers, whatever we call. I mean, it is just a nomenclature. Please don't get me wrong when I use that term. There is nobody who's a backbencher. In fact, if you ask me, I will say a backbencher is in a vantage position to listen. The front bencher always is on the toes because he's worried about making a nice impression. But the backbencher is hidden. He is able to, like a sponge, he is able to grasp whatever is being taught. The third is actually to institute a kind of a rewards or a punishment. If you ask questions and if you answer questions, if you participate, fine, you get 5 points. For example, even in IMA and so on, we have certain marks for weightage for class participation, what we call a CP and so on. But there is a certain value attached to that. And punishment can simply mean that, okay, you do more homework. I'm not saying that you do it, but I'm saying that, look, there are several ways in which you can do it. For example, if somebody is very averse, then the next thing is to next time pick him again and again till he starts showing that interest. And I think there is a certain cultural change which you have to bring in. I wouldn't say cultural change. I would say a cultural understanding that one should be proud of inquiry and not be ashamed of it. There is nothing to be ashamed of. Just to say that I'm pretty good at it or I'm pretty bad at that, it doesn't matter. We all want to improve. So it should not be a question of shaming somebody or ashaming somebody. And the most important thing to identify the gaps is a teacher's sense of the body language of the students. I think many a time this is the most important thing which is forgotten. I still remember one of my profs and several teachers, I can name many of them. It's a class of 40 students, 45 students. They are explaining something, they ask a question. Sometimes they don't even ask a question. They look at a student's face and they know that this boy is not understanding. I think that is that sense which is there, which will be in an actual classroom, which you may not find in an online and so on. And I think many teachers are very good at this in terms of sensing the body language. It is like saying that your face mirrors your heart, and it also mirrors your brain and your understanding. I think that's a very important thing. In the second aspect is to address and clarify. I think sometimes we as teachers also lag behind in that. There was a thumb rule for 1 hour of class, the preparation has to be 2 to 3 hours of preparation, which means the person who's going to ask questions or teach is going to be a subject matter expert. I think that is one of the most important things. You can't have somebody saying, I know a little bit there, a little bit here. That's just not going to work because children are quite smart. Maybe not smart enough to understand everything, but smart enough to pick out where others' weaknesses are. I think they are very good at that. And one has to be prepared. And the main thing actually is to identify the reason for the gap, knowledge gap. For example, it can be a mistaken line of thought at the most, I would say, advanced stage. Everything, they've gone through everything, they learned everything, but then there is a thought process where it has gone wrong somewhere, and so they have to be brought back online. That is one. Second is inadequate understanding. Oh, I don't know enough about this, and so I am really bewildered. The third is actually when they are ignorant, they don't know the subject at all because they are not studied, they are not prepared, they are not been assimilating in class. But the worst actually is the uninterest. You say, "Arey chalega, koi baat nahi." I mean, let it go on, class going on. In fact, I can give examples of two profs who are actually able to tackle this very well. One prof of mine, Dr. Bakul Dolakia, Professor Bakul Dolakia, was teaching microeconomics in IMA. And even if somebody asks a question, a mistaken line of thought, he used to catch exactly in that line of thought, where is it that he has gone wrong? I think that is a phenomenal characteristic of a teacher. I'm not saying everybody should have it in all subjects, it's not possible. But that is what we should all strive towards. And at the other end, I also had teachers profs who used to really rag a student and say, what it is, you just came to school just to see the building is intact? Or you just want to come in and loiter in and say whether the classes are going on well or not? You know, that sort of thing. But sometimes you have to chide children also. If they are not falling in line, if there are disciplinary issues. I wouldn't recommend this, nobody would. If they are not children who repeat things, but if they are really doing it wrong, yes, we should. Then the question of need for moderation, I think we have mischievous, inappropriate, non-contextual, extraneous, unruly questions. There are also unruly questions which children ask. And I think this is a big challenge. More challenging is actually the befuddling, irrelevant answers, meandering answers which you give. Why? We don't have all the time in the world. There is a fixed time. There are time constraints, and there are so many students who had to be taught, and there are also disciplinary issues. And in the modern parlance, in terms of webinars and so on, or even seminars, I find one very funny thing, which I call as the hogging the limelight. and self-promotion. I mean, I don't mean it in a negative sense, but basically people who like to have the limelight on themselves all the while. And so there are no questions asked, but actually it is more of their opinion being given. Whereas it is supposed to be, they are supposed to ask a question. Now, coming to the methods again, I think we have already discussed in detail. One is, of course, the teacher sets the questions to ask. But the second important thing is, when most of the time the children are encouraged to ask questions, they should also be discouraged from asking non-contextual questions. One has to be polite, but one has to be firm, and one has to be humorous without causing any offense. To me, the major guide in this to decide whether a question is useful in the context or not is, because of the time constraints, it's essentially a question of the utility of the question and the answers thereof should be more than the proportionate time taken to answer that question, including the questioning itself. And so I have a nice chart sort of thing, which is a very simple thing. On the x-axis, I just plot what is the usefulness of the question, which is the relevance. And on the y-axis, you just plot the time taken. So any line which is going straight this way, above the line is irrelevant, and below the line is something which is good. Because proportionately, there is more of value coming out of the exercise rather than time being spent on that. And one of the challenges in moderation also is that there are, okay, I'm sorry, we are not come to that, I guess. I'll cover that later. I think that's about it.
Thank you, sir. Thank you for your inputs, especially about bridging the knowledge gap and engaging the student. Yashika ma'am, would you like to have any inputs on this particular question?
I think you did. Subrata asked what are the challenges in formulating questions.
Correct.
And I think the biggest challenge is one in keeping the children engaged and, gauging what the level of the students is. The number one challenge is formulating your question, understanding what your question's purpose is. Right now, when we teach in our classrooms, our target seems to be the examination. And the questions is not a via media just to lead you to examinations. An examination is just to taste the pudding that you have made and to see where you've gone. But the challenge is in so designing your question that there is no room for doubt and there is clarity in what is being asked. In fact, I remember correcting one of the papers where there was a right angle triangle given. And it was obviously the 3, 4, 5, and the hypotenuse was made, and A, B, C, and X was written over there. The question asked was find X. The child just circled it, put an arrow, and said, here it is. What was wrong in it? There's nothing wrong in it. But what was wrong was in the formation of the question itself. In one of the junior classes, the teacher had said, write 3 words you can spell. So the child just picked up 3 words spell. What was wrong with it? So as teachers also, the challenge is in knowing the purpose of your questions and in designing your questions such that they are challenging, interesting, and fun.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you for those inputs. Thank you. And what about you, Upma ma'am? Would you like to put in a few points?
Yes, the biggest challenge is to put the question in the mouth of the child, to me. Because until and unless I firmly believe that there is no light which glows when the child understands the concept of the class over the child's head, it is only and only when the child would ask, or ultimately when the testing takes place, then the things come out that the child has not understood. So we need to, the biggest challenge is to make the child understand the importance of questioning, why the question is required to be asked, and then putting it in the right manner. Because I remember when I was doing my masters, my teacher used to tell me that it is more important to understand the question than to frame the answer. Because until and unless the child has understood what is asked in the right form, he or she won't be able to answer it in the required capacity. So that is the biggest challenge, to let the child ask the question or put the question to the mouth of the child.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you for that input. Sir, my question to you, Mr. Hariharan, sir, if you can also elaborate on a little about the challenge.
Yeah. See, in terms of the challenges which I spoke about, in terms of the process, the moderation is a challenge, but it comes up only when you have irrelevant questions and you are short of time. It is something like a mill at the end of the line, and there is nothing coming in. For example, I said the biggest challenge in the whole thing was that how do we motivate the children to ask questions? Okay, if you have a class where children don't ask questions, it is not necessary to say that they are all excellent in that subject. The mark itself shows, the test mark shows that what the gap in understanding or knowledge is, the learning gap is. There are certain limitations as far as a teacher is concerned in identifying the knowledge gaps. If the child doesn't say so, one is, of course, the tests and the exams and so on, which are going on, from which they have a fairly good idea about that. The second, which I spoke about, was in fact knowing from the body language of the student. Now, unfortunately, the body language is also gone when it comes to online teaching. You can't make out any body line. I mean, there is no, you have only a look, and even at that, you're looking at 30 pictures. You're not looking at one mosaic. That look is there, but that feel is not there. So it is very difficult to find out who is hiding, for example. There are some children who are so averse to being in the limelight. They will say, I don't understand, but doesn't matter. Let me not be the center of attraction. You know, some of them are shy types. I wouldn't say egotist. I mean, not that they have ego, they are small children, but still they don't want to be in the. So the question is, how does a teacher find out what are the learning gaps? There are schools with just about 20, 30, 40 students in a class. There are also schools with around 60 students in a class. How do you find out what the knowledge gap is? The reason I'm again talking about knowledge gap is because that is the objective of the Q&A session, to bridge the knowledge gap. The biggest is how to identify the gaps. What are the gaps? That is why I spoke about encouraging the children to come out. But their power of articulation is also not enough. They're not able to say. I mean, if somebody has a doubt about something because they're not able to articulate well, but when they can't articulate the topic, how can we expect them to articulate the issue they have with the topic? I think we should be reasonable also in this. So sometimes we tend to depend too much on the child to tell us what the issue is. But the only other way to do that is not to worry about too much of those gaps, but to see that we carry along everybody in terms of the topic and in terms of the gap. That is one of the reasons I said that I wouldn't like to focus on the front benchers, so to speak, but call everybody. I think this has already been spoken about by everybody, that you have to do it by rotation or something, so that you call a fairly good representation of students whose doubts are being clarified. I think that is a major constraint. But a bigger constraint is a question of time. On one hand, you have students who don't ask questions at all. There are other end, there are students who keep asking questions, dime a dozen, a number of questions. And they take away most of the time of the class in those questions. So this time management is very, very important. For want of a better word, I'm using it as time management. One way I would always look at in a classroom is, suppose we have a class of say 45 minutes, we are setting aside 10 minutes for questions and answers. And in 10 minutes, we want to get through at least 5 questions. And so that means it uses on an average around 2 minutes a question. So 2 minutes a question, any question which is going to take a much longer time, the moderating teacher should say, yes, I think this is a very good question, but we don't have time to cover that in full. So can we, if you don't mind, can we hold it on to the next class, next period? That is one example. Because we had to remember that we are looking at students as a whole, and we don't want to satisfy just one. So we have to look at questions which can be answered. As many questions can be answered, or rather a reasonably good number of questions to be answered and doubts clarified and knowledge gaps bridged within that particular time of 10 minutes. Another challenge is most of the time, teachers sometimes don't realize where children could have a certain knowledge gap or a doubt. Most teachers do that very well. What they do is they build it into their lesson delivery itself. They don't wait for the question and answer session, but they cover it in the lesson delivery itself. Oh, this is a point where people may be asking more questions, and so clarify that a little more. It's again a question of time management, and I think that is the biggest worry. But the teacher also has certain other ways to moderate. For example, mischievous students. Teachers know the known defaulters, so to speak, in class. Those who always keep asking maybe irrelevant questions. There might be some mischievous students who might say, सिर्फ 5 मिनट बाकी है, अभी थोड़ा और 2 क्वेश्चन पूछ लेते हैं, क्लास खत्म हो जाएगा. No time for homework or something. I'm just thinking out of the air, but there are different kinds of children with different needs. Somebody is more worried about when the bell will ring and I'll leave and go home. And so you have to manage a bevy of, I would call it for a better word, a bevy of students who have different objectives. And this is a time, the time management, and they had to look at the betterment of a whole class rather than 1 or 2 students. Of course, if there are some special coaching institutes for some of those higher learning, for example, IIT, this, that, etc., maybe there you can afford to spend more time on some specific points. But the biggest challenge is time. And before that, encouraging children to ask questions so that we can make out what their knowledge gaps are.
Thank you, sir. Thank you for the input. My next question is, thank you, sir. Thank you very much. My next question is directed towards Ms. Upma Mahajan. Ma'am, how is this challenge managed in the online format? I think Mr. Sir Hariharan had already delved into it a little bit, but if you can elaborate on this particular point, it will be very nice. Thank you.
Yeah. In online classes, it was a common saying by many teachers that whenever a child is questioned, he or she, if he or she doesn't knows the answer, there's a simple remedy to it, to switch off the microphone or to leave the class and justify that there was a network issue. But it has been commemorated by many teachers that children love to answer and make a positive image in the online classes as well. Many of the children, they have improved themselves a lot, because in online classes it is not just uh, limited to just answering the questions. The one who is a good listener would exactly be able to answer the question. And there are n number of methods in online classes where children love to answer the questions. There are many gamified techniques through which we can give away some good badges to the children who have answered in the at first, or who have answered correctly in the most appropriate manner, or who has just quickly answered the question. They can give some badges to the children that okay, he's the winner of this, and now we should have a clap for him or her. And we have some gamified platforms also, where whenever a chapter is completed, there are sectional recapitulation questions which are available, and it is right in the format where the child clears different levels and move up to the different sections of the same chapter. So online teaching has given lot of option to the teachers. Though the face-to-face questioning is not available, yet there are many positive impacts of this online teaching on the questioning ability of the children, and it has given a right to the child to answer in the form where he or she likes to, whether he needs to upload any image or he wants to answer by some through showing some experiment, that is the kinesthetic skill or learning by doing, or this type of options have been created. We are not just limited to open-ended questions or the hots or the lots, and it has drastically given a new venture to the questioning technique.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you so much for your inputs. And I would also like to direct this question to Yashika, ma'am, if she has any views on this particular point.
Thank you, Shobhitra. This is one topic that I love speaking on, because we have, derided the online education system at times, saying that it has had a negative effect on children as far as writing is concerned. The social skills have gone. While I completely agree that the social skills of the children as far as the school environment is concerned have been affected, but the beauty of the online platform, that you've got willing learners coming to the screen. When you had a class of 30, it works both ways. The students are there, not just because their parents force them in front of a camera, because they have the ability to simply, as Upma mentioned, say, ma'am, network issue, and say, thank you very much, and switch off the camera. But apart from that, the teachers in the online teaching gave the students a sense of normalcy in this pandemic. And I've always called my teachers the Corona angels. You had the warriors, but the teachers were the angels. And when a teacher is speaking to a student in an online mode, it is one-on-one teaching that is taking place. In a class of 40, 45, where a teacher is standing there in an offline scenario, that's one teacher addressing 45 students. But in an online mode, while you're a part of the class, it's still one-on-one teaching that was taking place. And questioning in an online environment was brilliant, because you had this random name picker, for example, one of the tools, where the entire class's names were there. It was a spin wheel. And the moment you click on it, it would spin and pick up a child on its own. Then you've got things like Jamboard. Of course, all of us are familiar with Mentimeter and Padlet and, online poll that was taking place. But you've got tools such as Doon, where you could convert your lesson into a comic strip. Or if a video was playing, the video would automatically stop in the middle and ask some questions. So questioning was innovative and fun in an online mode, provided, of course, the teacher wanted to go that way. You could, of course, stick to the same preach and teach and ask a question method. But if you incorporated technology in your teaching, apart from simply using a PPT, questioning and learning in the online mode was brilliant.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you for those inputs. Hariharan, sir, would you like to say something on this?
I think this was an excellent point which was made. I should confess that even I didn't think about it. Though we keep using it, the online mode. When an online mode classes are going on, actually, even though the teacher is seeing so many students, but the student sees only the teacher. And it is a one-to-one. I think it is a brilliant point, madam.
Thank you.
I think I never thought of it that way. So it has a tremendous impact. And in fact, I would even venture to say, I have no empirical evidence for this, but my feeling is that in an online teaching, in a normal class, you have a distribution of students, grades and so on, and performance and so on. But my conjecture is that in an online environment, this would kind of spread to the extremes, if you understand what I mean. For example, even the middle ones, those who are really interested and who are able to ride on the advantages of an online system, they'll be able to upgrade themselves and get more knowledge and then move to our higher end. But those uninterested or disinterested who are in the middle, who can't escape in a normal class because they are seen, they are visible, they will tend to also move towards the to the lower end. I wouldn't say they will do extremely badly or anything, but I'm saying there is a certain tendency where the central tendency will not apply. So they'll actually be going more. So that is one of the challenges, I would say. But on the whole, the advantages of online teaching is phenomenal because the children now start to learn on their own. Self-study. I mean, this is the biggest boon, I would say. After this, there is no need for a child to be told to go and study on your own. They will just do it. They are already used to it. And in some cities in our country too, we have climatic conditions which is not very, very conducive. For example, the peak of summer or the troughs of winter, when things are very, very bad, not physically very convenient. I think online teaching and learning is a boon. We don't have to worry about portions to be completed, no time. Within 2 classes, I had to finish so much portion, we don't have to worry. But discipline is the most important key in this, is a key in this case. Children also have to show discipline. And we as teachers and educators also have to move them towards a disciplined lifestyle. So that is what I would say about a Q&A session. Known defaulters are known. The guys who hide, people who say they have connectivity problems. Oh, connectivity issues, sir. My Vodafone is not working. My Airtel is not working. The connectivity is bad, etc. You'll always find. But the teachers are good enough to make out the pattern. Who are the ones who do that? And when do they do it? Especially when they have not done their homework. And so I'm just giving an example, or they're not prepared well. And so teachers can make out. And so I would say online is good in conclusion. Online is good in conclusion, and there is not much of an issue in moderation also because of the same reasons.
Thank you, sir. Thank you so much for those inputs. Thank you again for being here, all of you. I would now want to call on Achin to deliberate on the vote of thanks. Thank you.
So I think really wonderful session we had, and very seamless, free-flowing discussion, which is the beauty of Together for Education webinars. To create an academic community in the cloud. Like-minded academic community, of course, each senior educator panelist comes with their own thought process, at times divergent, at times debates, discourse, and I think that's the beauty of it. The best part is, what I really liked about today's session is that it is so free-flowing. The interaction is so free-flowing. And I think our moderator, his task was significantly reduced, because the way all the senior panelists took over the exchange of views, thought process, everyone contributing to all questions, really beautiful, wonderful. I must appreciate. So Burrett sir, thank you so much. Thank you, and of course, sir, with your decades of experience and as a master of your craft, I think you give us a flying start. And I really liked the way Bharat sir deliberated on, and you mentioned about this idea of requesting a colleague to come in as an observer for his or her feedback. I think that's a wonderful idea, a very thought-provoking idea. And of course, the other part was putting a question across in a way in which the onus shifts from a child to a teacher, so that child doesn't suffer from any kind of inhibitions. Have I been able to explain it correctly? Have I been able to provide clarity? So I think that speaks volumes about the way different things can be put across. So sir, thank you again. Thank you so much for always giving us a great start and for taking the lead. Yashika ma'am, thank you so much for being a part of this. Indeed, ma'am, some wonderful thoughts from you, of course. And I really like this particular example will, of course, stay with me, and I'm sure will stay with all members of our esteemed audience here today. About a child when being asked to find X, circling it in a question paper. That really goes on to show that how important designing a question is and how challenging it is. At times it seems so simple at the surface, but when we actually deep dive, it's so thought-provoking and calls for so much more deliberation, calls for so much more ensuring that we provide clarity. And also, I think the way you started off, that a teacher should be more of a guide and not a stage in the stage. I think that's very well summarized here, the entire thought process. That one sentence actually summarizes the entire discussion for the day. And of course, also how to make the class more lively, interactive. For example, for instance, using a softball, pre-conference, post-conference. Some wonderful points from you, ma'am. And of course, the last thing that you mentioned, teachers, educators' role during pandemic. So we at Notebook, we always believe that teachers, their contribution is second to none in terms of pandemic, and ensuring that students didn't lose a precious academic year. So calling them as Corona angels, I think that's a wonderful term, and we will be, and that this term surely stays with us. It's really great, ma'am. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for your views.
Thank you for having me here with you, Achin. It was a pleasure being here.
Our pleasure, ma'am. We really learned so much from you. Thank you. Thank you. Upma, ma'am, thank you again. I think great perspective. And I think the way you started off was really, it was a flying start. That when a child actually walks in first time to the gate of the school, he or she has so much of curiosity. And as a parent, I can so closely identify with it. My 5-year-old twin boys, very recently when I got them, and of course, first 2 years because of the pandemic, they couldn't go to school. But that kind of curiosity, as you rightly mentioned, that why stars sprinkle, why the sky is blue, why water is so fresh and so clear. Actually, what happens is in this journey, as we progress through years, somewhere from idealism, this entire walk that we all as human beings we go through, from idealism to realism. At times, children they lose their curious self, their charm, and in the process, as they go forward, number of questions reduce. And I think with regard to this, Hariharan sir also has made a wonderful point. That's really important to give a child that confidence to be inhibition-free, to be able to ask what he or she wants to. And honestly speaking, what others think about it, honestly speaking, doesn't matter. Because if that's something that keeps on bothering us, we'll never be able to freely express ourselves. So I think, ma'am, wonderful point. I think great. And also the way you deliberated about Lord Gautam Buddha, his teachings, and till date how it's been quite practiced in monasteries. I think it speaks volumes about the culture of our great nation, and also about how much we can actually, how much we can actually inculcate, imbibe from it, how much we actually can learn from it to go back and there's so much of treasure that lies there untapped. So I think great. And also you mentioned about online classes. The fact that it was actually an opportunity for so many students. And in fact, we have seen this firsthand today when so more than 2.6 million children are using notebook. And personally, I get an opportunity to interact with so many of them, their parents, teachers. One thing that I see very significantly that it has actually given confidence to not many students who at times in a classroom environment, maybe they're finding it, and now when they go back to class, I'm sure they'll be even better. Of course, the solution can never be completely online. Schools have their own place, no doubt about it. I completely believe that looking at a child's holistic development, the role of school is very, very important as miniature versions of the society. But online also, I'm sure, has served this purpose. And going forward, I'm sure schools somewhere is going to be digital, a more hybrid mode. So I think thank you so much, ma'am, for your views on this. Really wonderful to have you here. Our pleasure. Hariharan, sir, thank you. I think thank you, sir. Some great points coming from you with your decades of experience, both as a professional as well as now as an academician. I think some great points you made, sir. And especially the way you defined it, starting from the objective of the QA session, and you were very clear about it, that what the objective is, the guiding principles, be it both about learning from others and not reinventing the wheel. And also, I think you stressed a lot on identifying the gap and bridging the gap, which is, of course, the ultimate objective. So I think to bridge the knowledge gap, and that's the whole objective. So I think great session we had, and I'm sure our members of our esteemed audience who are here today benefited from this. I thank all the panelists again for their time and for sharing their thoughts with us. We look forward to your continued support in the sessions to come. Thank you again. Thank you. Take care and goodbye.
Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank
It was
you very
great
much.
interacting with you all. Thank you.
Our pleasure, ma'am.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Yeah,
Bye-bye.
thank you. Bye. Bye.
Thank you.